On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? None of them could be found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner." And he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. The Old Testament, the basic Old Testament lesson for this day is not the one that's written in your handout, your celebrant. It is actually from the 29th chapter of Jeremiah, and it goes like this. "I wrote a letter to the priests, the prophets, the leaders of the people, and to all the others whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken away as prisoners from Jerusalem to Babylon. The Almighty God, the God of Israel, says to all those people whom he allowed Nebuchadnezzar to take away as prisoners from Jerusalem to Babylon, build your houses, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what you grow in them. Marry and have children. Then let your children get married so they also might have children. You must increase in numbers and not decrease. Work for the good of the cities where I have made you go as prisoners. Pray to me on their behalf, because if they are prosperous, you will be prosperous too. I, the Lord, the God of Israel, warn you not to let yourselves be deceived by the prophets who live among you, or by any others who claim that they can predict the future. Do not pay attention to their dreams. They are telling you lies in my name. I did not send them. I am the Lord God Almighty and have spoken." There was in the annals of one of the Methodist traveling clergy in early Minnesota history that made this entry in his notebook or his diary when he was going to Minneapolis for the first time. He made the entry to say, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Minneapolis." I know a lot of many people that feel that way, particularly between November 1st and the end of February. But it comes from a time I guess when some of the oldest of you remember when there were more people in rural areas than there were in the cities. And the rural areas were considered at that time to be clean. They were considered to be the good places to raise children. It was the place where people were really godly. And if you were to go to the city, that was a danger. The daughters would lose their virtue, and the sons would get in with bad company. A lot of people said, don't go to the city. Stay in the rural areas where things are good, things are nice, and there is a virtue. There's a suggestion in the reading from Jeremiah that maybe the people that were captured in Babylon felt that God wasn't even close to them, wasn't present. And they were writing back to Jeremiah and saying, I don't think our time here will be very long, and we'll be back, and then we'll be able to worship God because we can't do it here. We're in a foreign country, and we're prisoners. We're slaves. We've got no future. Things look really black and bleak. This is about 700 years before the birth of Christ. The Babylonians had captured Jerusalem and ransacked the city. They'd taken most of the leaders and a good share of the residents and transferred them to their capital city, Babylon. But for some reason, Jeremiah, the great prophet, and probably the greatest leader of Israel at that time, was left in Jerusalem. Maybe they didn't want him influencing the people. Get him out of our lives. So the people had written back, as I said, to Jeremiah and said, tell us really, I know you're the chief prophet. You're the one that can tell us really how long our time is here. And it is important because we can't possibly exist here properly, and we certainly can't worship God. They felt that God was territorial. They had no question whether God existed or not, but he only existed in certain places. And if you were absent from those places, you couldn't see God. And Jeremiah gives them the reality test. He said, God isn't territorial. God is everywhere. And you can worship him there just as well as you can any place. And actually, the people that are telling you these tales about you returning are false prophets anyway. I think you're there for the duration. I think you're there for a very long time. So buckle up and make yourself face the fact that you're going to be there for some time, but that doesn't mean that you can't worship. That doesn't mean that you can't be a part of God's creation and kingdom, and it certainly doesn't mean you can't be a good witness. Just because things look black and bleak and dark doesn't mean that life is over for you. Now, for Jeremiah to say that and to write a letter to that was really probably shocking to the Israelites. It was the first time they'd heard that. What? God can be in Babylon too? We can even worship him in the darkest of times? That's just utter outrage. Basically, Jeremiah was saying three things. First of all, he said, avoid simple answers to complex issues. As I go around every day in my common going places, I discover one thing that troubles me a great deal, and that is how many people are living in darkness, who don't seem to have a purpose, don't seem to have a goal. Sometimes we feel like we're in a foreign land. At times we feel homesick for the place that really was that day of yesteryear when things in our mind were better, were good, were simple. We face economic woes. We face military unrest. We have scandals at the White House. We have global concerns. And we cry out and saying, how can we be happy? How can we be worshiping at a time like this? It's really bad. And if you talk to some of the young people, their future looks pretty grim. We talked about global warming last time, as one young 16-year-old from Sweden making an international issue of it. And said this is the major issue that we face in the coming years, and some of the presidential candidates are saying the same thing. It's doom and gloom. And so enjoy what you can now. And some people are saying, oh, it's just a phase. We'll get past it. And it'll just be a few days and things will be all right again. Jeremiah said, don't give simple answers to complex questions. You're going to be in this for a while. And things might not be that optimistic. But that doesn't mean that you can't be a shining light of God in this time, particularly now when people seem to be lost. when people are questioning whether they have a future, whether the church will survive. God is still here, and buckle up and get used to it and proclaim the word in these trying times. Most of us want a simple answer. We want a quick fix. But the prophets who said this is all God's will, probably not to be believed. But God can work through these perilous times and still give us the peace and assurance of his presence. Second thing that Jeremiah was saying to the people there is make the best of where you are. He wrote, build houses, plant gardens, have families, deal with it. You might be in Jerusalem a long time, but God is here even in Babylon. Last Sunday we had an ordination here. That's a significant event in the church. And one of the things that I said to Mark in terms of his entering the ministry, actually entering the ministry in our denomination, is that you're going at what people are saying is a bad time. Church attendance is down. Giving is down. Church activity is down. And the future, even by the experts in our own church, say that the future looks grim. Why would somebody come at this time? Well, this is the time to come. This is the time to say, God is still here in our darkness, in our uncertainty, in our declining numbers, and there is still a possibility that with our help in clinging to the promises of God, we can still build back things that have been broken down. There was an interesting illustration made about a circus trainer. He was the trainer of the big cats. And he was in a routine at the circus, and he was in a tent at night with 8 Bengal tigers. And he was showing his expertise in training by snapping his whip, and the lions would all, or the tigers would all do certain things when he cracked the whip. It depended upon how he cracked it as what trick they would do or what stance they took. What happened is that the lights went out. We had a power failure. And the man continued to do what he had done all along. After the performance was over and lights came back on, they interviewed the trainer, the big cat trainer. And he said, they asked him, what did you have as a feeling when the lights went out? And you knew the tigers could see you, but you couldn't see them. We said, I know that I couldn't see the tigers and the tigers couldn't see me, but what was important is the tigers didn't know that I couldn't see them. And so when I kept doing what I needed to do, and I kept cracking the whip and giving the same commands, they must have understood in their own mind that I knew it was going on, even though I didn't see them. I wonder if this is a good illustration of the way we should work as Christian people. When the lights go out and it looks black, and we face uncertain futures, and people think that we don't have any answers, it's important that we act the same way we always had in our commitment, in our dedication to our church and our God. And it will continue to survive, and we will be God's grace in a broken and dark world. God is even in Babylon. The third thing that Jeremiah said is, God is with you even in the darkest hours. God just doesn't disappear. Even in Babylon, we still need to look for justice. He's looking for justice. We still need to overcome our adversities, and He will help us overcome our adversities, even in the darkness. We need to replace doubt with hope, hate with love. I am very much a fan of the paintings of Thomas Kincaid. He's the painter of light. And in many of Kincaid's paintings, they are very gloomy if the light isn't there. But in all of Kincaid's paintings, there is always a light that overcomes all the grayness, the blackness, the darkness, the somewhat sterile world that Kincaid believed we lived in. The painter of light. And one of the things, Kincaid was a Christian. Unfortunately, Kincaid came to a place where the black hole became so big that he took his own life. But Kincaid still believed in the light. And it shows in every one of his pictures. And wouldn't it be nice for people to say about us that even in the darkest moments, we understood that God was still there, and we were the light, the shining light of His creation. Thomas Weissel was a Jew during the time of the Second World War and spent a great deal of time in a prison camp. And he said at night we were packed in so tight, if somebody died during the night, they had to stay there until morning because we couldn't move or get them out. He said, I remember one night when it seemed severely oppressive. There was a guy by the name of Julian who had smuggled a violin in there. And Julian played that violin all through the night. It was a beautiful sound, and it was particularly beautiful in the midst of all this blackness and darkness. In the morning, when we awoke, Julian was dead, and his violin was broken. But for those of us who survived, we remember that night so vibrantly. It was the one message that came through us in the midst of the most awful blackness you could ever imagine. The message from Jeremiah is great. Even in the blackness, God's light shines through. And even in despair, in the darkness of your own life, your light can shine through if you hold true to the promises of God. And to tell people that God is still here. God is still a part of your soul, even in Manor. Amen.